Hello and welcome to Roll to Cast, a tabletop RPG podcast with both actual plays and interviews. I'm Chris, and this week I'm joined at the table by Sean.
Hello.
And Ellen.
Hi.
Following the end of Season 2's actual play of Vampire the Masquerade, we continue our inter-season content as we're joined today by a fantastic guest. He's a writer, game developer, community manager, marketing specialist, storyteller, plus so much more, and he's joining us all the way from sunny Melbourne, Australia. It's Brian Holland.
Sunny with your tongue planted firmly in your cheek.
Australian humour.
Yeah. It's a little interstate humour for you guys.
There we are. How are you, mate?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me. You're one of a very select group of people who have used the contact feature on my website. So congratulations.
Was that a test? Did we pass?
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. I'm so excited to talk about my favorite thing, which is sitting around a table pretending to be a vampire. And a big fan of really diminishing my hobby into its most base form. So for a long time it was just like, sometimes you just want to hang out with your friends and pretend to be an orc for a little while. And it's just, we can veer away from that subject as well if you'd like. But
it's all we do, really, isn't it?
We just veer in and out.
Yeah.
It's about anything. But part of this is because we're an Australian podcast and you're an Australian working with a whole bunch, not just White Wolf, but a whole bunch of role-playing game companies. And we thought we'd throw a bit of light towards you, a bit of spotlight, and
bit of sunny Melbourne light
there
towards
you
you.
go.
No,
And-
vampires hate that.
Yeah, that's right.
You fools.
and talk about you and how you got into the industry and your thoughts on the industry and all of that sort of stuff.
well, let me know how you want to begin. Like can David Copperfield it or
Let's start right at the start. How did you get into role-playing games?
how to get into role-playing games? Oh, this is one of my favorite stories to tell. Not that I've told it on any other podcasts or anything.
No, of course.
I'll be checking.
This is exclusive, ladies and gentlemen.
This may surprise you and potentially some of our listeners to learn that I was a bit of a nerd in high school.
No.
And I know, right? Oh my gosh. But I was a nerd in high school and I played a lot of tabletop games and board games and such. But it was always like role-playing was always like this final frontier. It was kind of like this was still ripe in game shame era, like in the early noughties. Like this is long before Critical Role or any sort of popularization of tabletop. It was still like the gamers were still firmly in the basement.
Yeah.
But so me and my friends, there's no way we were going to play Dungeons and Dragons. Like we weren't losers. God, no. What we wanted was to play the D20 version of Star Wars.
Oh,
so,
yeah. That's much cooler.
yeah, no, so much cooler. So I took my little pay pack from my very first music gig when I was like, I would have been 14 or 15. And I had consulted with my friends. I'm like, oh, yes, I'm going to go buy the Star Wars game. We're going to play the Star Wars role-playing game. It's going to be great. Lightsabers rule. And I went to the little shop in the slightly larger country town outside of the small country town that I grew up in with the intent to buy the Star Wars role-playing game. And when I got there, I saw something else on the shelf, and the clerk to me uttered a sentence which, without being too hyperbolic, really did change the entire course of my life. Because I said, "What's that?" And he said, "That's the vampire game." So I'm sure you can imagine the look on my friends' faces when I returned, not with the Star Wars D20 game, but I was just like, "Oh, by the way, we're doing this instead. We're playing vampires."
Yeah.
Not with the space opera, with the gothic punk.
The gothic punk, yeah. No, and none of us were goths. Like we were like nerds and kind of some like sport nerds and just computer. Like we weren't like goth scene emo people or anything like that either. I have no idea to this day what it was that made me want to play the vampire game. I should point out as well that this was Vampire the Requiem. I then went back steps and went back into Masquerade and as I still call it, the old World of Darkness versus the new World of Darkness. And I understand very clearly why a lot of old hats and a lot of people don't like the new World of Darkness or some themes of what is now called the Chronicles of Darkness. But for me, it'll always be very, very important because it's what brought me into the World of Darkness to begin with and really did, as I'll say again, alter the course of my life. I'd be a very different person, both personally and creatively, if it weren't for Vampire. I think a lot about what would happen, what my life would look like if I had the Star Wars game instead, and I don't know if it's much better.
I have to wonder, though, I know this is going the opposite direction, but did you ever end up picking up the Star Wars game?
Oh, Oh, so I was at hard pivot. I was at RuneQuest Con Down Under.
Oh, nice.
This would have been in October or November, I want to say. And there was a second-hand store, and they literally had that book. And I tweeted it saying, like, hey, this is the book that I nearly bought instead of getting Vampire. And a friend of mine, like, replied being like, oh, man, like, I always wanted to play that game. I've never seen it anywhere, so I bought it for him. But yeah, no, I've never gone to it. I'm sure it's fantastic. I've played some Star Wars role-playing games. I love Star Wars very, very deeply. I do not think it at all works as a role-playing game. But,
Of course, if you touch that Star Wars book now, you'll enter an alternate dimension and you'll just ruin the fabric of reality as we know it. So best to stay away from it. I'm sure it's great, but
yeah, I'll wake up from this dream.
Yeah, I have a question. You made money from music at like age 14?
Oh yeah, so I play the violin. I had, it was a gig that I think it was probably the first and only actual paying gig I ever had, was just playing some folk music at a pub in the as I said, the small country town that I grew up in. And I think they gave me like $60 or something like that, and I had some other pocket money. This was before I was working, so it was a big deal. That's the other reason it was so like loose, that I didn't buy the thing that I'd built up to buy. I went and bought this other book instead. Yeah,
I mean, like, we're all gigging creatives like here in this room, but I'm like, $60 for a gig, that's pretty good. And I'm like, I'm 24, right, not 14.
Well, there's a similar point of entry. I'm the player of the three of us who knew World of Darkness and introduced it to these two, but I started with Requiem as well.
Oh, really? That's so cool. What covenant do you belong to? Here's some really spicy content.
Yeah, that's right. Here we go. Really niche people for a really niche audience. I'm a LS player. I always play
the Second Estate.
Yeah.
How lovely for you.
Yeah, that's right. You're playing Invictus by the sounds of things?
No, not at all. I'm a Circle of the Crone, so I've got nothing to do with any of you. You probably really hate.
These words mean nothing to me.
No.
It's great.
I mean, I still do get the
No,
trash talk element.
You're Invictus?
It turns out that I'm a Gemini, so I have a lot of dichotomy, but my favorite things are like Lancashire Sanctum and Circle of the Crone were my favorite, just as the same way that Deva and Nosferatu were my favorite. I really like opposites, apparently.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got a lot of time for the Sanctum.
Yeah, beautiful.
Oh wait, you're a legit Gemini, as in
real life. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
I mean,
same.
yeah.
Snapsy. Twinsies.
Good.
Bit of horoscope humor for you there.
Yeah, I hit my Saturnalia this coming Saturday, so I'm looking forward to that.
Oh my goodness! Well, congratulations.
I'm sorry, I'm not dreading it at all.
Brian, if you're a Nosferatu Deva lover for Requiem, what clan do you enjoy in Masquerade?
My excuse for this, ironically, is that I'm Gemini, so I can never make my mind
up. Very
it
good.
really depends.
I see through that.
Yeah. At the end of the day, as much as I would like to be a Magister, a member of Clan La Sombra, as much as I think of myself occasionally as a proud member of the Banu Hakim, I'm pretty sure I'm a member of the Ministry when it's all said and done. I am a Setite, yes.
Yeah.
So, and I locked that in when I had some lovely art commissioned of me as a Setite, yes, on Twitter, and I'm feeling really, really awful. I did not prepare this, but the artist's name, she's fantastic. She does a lot of cool vampire specific masquerade commissions. She did that one, did a bit of a viral run where it was like all the different clans' fangs that went around.
We reposted that.
So I contacted her after I saw that, and I was like, hey, can you indulge me and draw a picture of me as a vampire, please?
That is
also
so
in my
dope.
cowboy outfit. Yeah.
What is it about? Like because you said you steered away from Star Wars and brought Vampire, and that's what started your love of it. What is it about the Vampire system that actually drew you to it and kept you playing?
Geez, that's a lot.
I know.
So the perplexing thing that I can probably one day unpack in therapy is that vampires, when I was a child, used to scare me beyond belief. Like absolutely just terrified of vampires, like based on nothing, obviously. Then, I don't know, there was sort of like that alluring thing of reclaiming that fear maybe. In terms of what had me sticking with it, I do really think it was the way that it had been written and helmed, at least Requiem, by the masterful Justin Achille, and the foundations that have been laid for it by Mark Rein-Hagen and the original White Wolf team was that it's just so based on story. And I think, there's nothing I can say that wasn't already so brilliantly explained in the World of Darkness documentary, which you can catch on Amazon Prime. Also, if you're in Australia, you can catch it on Amazon Prime, and I highly recommend it because it does a deep dive on the history of the World of Darkness and Vampire. It's very much worth the watch. But it's the same. It is the fact that the game cared about character and story, and it put that at the forefront. So much so that when we started diverging and playing other games that maybe were more focused on, your combat ability and killing monsters to get treasure and experience points, that we still, at least my core group and me as a game master, would always come back to well, this needs to be about story first, because without context, we're just rolling dice and putting numbers down. And there's nothing wrong with that if you want to do that, but that's just sort of what I think will always have me bringing back to Vampire, is the ability to tell these stories about people, because I firmly believe that no matter what story you tell or what you write about, whether or not they're humans at all, it's unavoidable to write about the human condition. And you're always telling stories about, and then this goes much deeper into just what I like about horror as a genre, I suppose, as well, which is that the best horror, I think, tells a story that would work regardless of whether or not it had the horror template cast upon it. And what the best horror does is it uses horror as a lens to enhance those otherwise already very good stories. And I think that's one of the reasons Vampire will always be a part of my life, and definitely the lives of, hundreds of thousands of other people across the globe.
And you kind of go into the idea of V5 and emotional storytelling in an article for Good Games, didn't you?
Before I worked for the World of Darkness team at Paradox, I was at Gen Con for the second time with Good Games, who I still do work for, mainly in their head office doing content. And yeah, I did a interview with some of the creative team, the Martin Erickson, who at the time was the lead storyteller, and my now boss Jason Carl about V5, and we talked a lot about that. Also, Kenneth Haidt popped in randomly, which was really great because he's just quite a big name in the industry, and it was great. He was literally wandering past and said hi to Jason. I think they just invited him to sit down, and I was there halfway through the interview, being like, "Oh, okay, this is fine. Cool. Hey, bro,
I haven't prepared.
Can I ask you some more questions?"
Yeah, it's such wonderful kismet that there's this interview of you with the Vampire creators, and then now you get to be involved in it. What was the bridging steps there from being oh, this is really cool, to this is still cool, but now I am in it?
Because that's the really interesting thing, is that whenever, we've done interviews in the past, it's always that thing where generally creators will say, and I did high school and then college and then I worked for Marvel. And it's whoa, hold on.
hang on.
It's like that bridge between a love of something and then being able to do it for a living. How did that come about?
I had to give myself a kick in the ass to make it happen. So my background was I was actually fuck it, I can say who I worked for. I don't work for them anymore. I was a manager at Ralph Lauren for 5 years.
Holy shit.
Yeah, so
okay.
I worked in high fashion. There was surely a moment I wasn't happy. I was doing that while also writing manuscripts for novels and telling myself that, well, when my novel gets published, I'll get out of here, and doing a lot of game stuff on the side, just as a hobby. But it was when one time I had I had endlessly shitty meetings at that company. They're horrible people to work for.
We've all seen The Devil Wears Prada.
But one of the times it was me as at the time I would have been 25 or something when this happened, and just had an insufferable meeting with an insufferable human being. And at the end of it, they said, "Oh, by the way, you need to do something about your shoes. Those shoes don't really work. You need to change your outfit for the shoe." And I walked out there. I'm I'm 25. I just don't want to ever have a job where someone has to tell me what kind of shoes I can and cannot wear.
Well, if you're wearing Crocs, that's a problem.
Well, no, I wasn't. They were just Anyway.
But they were high-end fashion Crocs.
They were high-end fashion Crocs. And yes, so I decided to quit my job and start working in games. I took a very, 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 very big pay cut and started working at just a local retail Good Games store. Started doing some game jams for digital games on the side. My first digital game jam thing went pretty well. I went to GDC, which is the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, on a pretty heavy limb after with some support from people from the local digital games industry here in Melbourne. They're really, it's a pretty great community. And when I say support, I don't mean financially. I mean like they were very encouraging. I was fortunate enough to be able to pay my own way, and I took meetings, and I took meetings with people just like, hey, I'd love to meet you and chat with you, and just trying to form genuine connections with a whole bunch of different people, which is really great. Met Chris Barassa, who made Darkest Dungeon. If you've played Darkest Dungeon, he's a lovely human being. We sat at the table, and we were going to talk about horror games, but I was wearing a Warhammer t-shirt. And he just started talking about how much he loved Warhammer for like a really long time. That was great. Like we just had a sincere connection. And one of my other meetings was with a man named Tobias, who was the then CEO of White Wolf. And we just got chatting and whatnot. And we had a nice chat. And then a few months later, he just happened to email me saying like, hey, would working with us as a community manager be something you might be interested in? Yeah, so I guess things sort of happen slowly in a whole bunch of ways. Like from my work at the retail store for Good Games, I then convinced the head office to take me to Gen Con so I could cover the event for them on their website. And I now still do that stuff for them, even though I don't work retail anymore. And obviously then there's my whole digital game side as well. So when I went to GDC the second time, I decided I wanted to take my digital game stuff a bit more seriously, and I applied for a grant from the fine folks here at Film Victoria to fund a video game, and they did fund it. And so, yeah, it sounds really wanky. I used to think this whenever people would tell me this, but like if you want to do something, you can't say just do it, because that's obviously ridiculous, and you need to acknowledge that certain people are more privileged than others, for sure, and I do acknowledge that. But what you can say is like do your best to create the opportunities for yourself to succeed in whatever way that is. And I suppose that's been my sort of creed for the last 4 years. And I'm still not exactly where I want to be, but I'm way away from being told what shoes to wear.
Yeah, you got to go into the store, you got to pick up the vampire book.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, you adhere to the practice that gives actors like us kind of the most anxiety, which is networking.
I hate it.
You network.
Yes,
You network well.
I love being told what shoes to wear.
Yeah.
This isn't the life for me.
Yeah, networking was definitely scary, but once you sort of realize that the nice thing about the games industry is that the majority of the people have very similar backgrounds in terms of just having a passion for games. So if you just hit someone, like send someone an email or DM them on Twitter being like, hey, so you're going to be at Gen Con as well. Like, I like this thing that you did. Would love to buy you a coffee and just chat about the industry or whatever. The majority of people, if assuming they have the time, will be like, yeah, that sounds great. And you should approach networking from a position of wanting to make a genuine connection with somebody. I've got some real horror stories of like, hey, that's a great example of what not to do when you're trying to network.
Yeah. So
not from me, from what I've witnessed, to be like, cool, I don't ever want to be that guy.
So instead of wearing a Warhammer shirt, I should just go in with a shirt that says, I love being in stuff.
Completely unrelated, Brian. Can we buy you a coffee sometime?
Sure, you can come over to Melbourne. I believe our borders are totally open right now.
I have a question about, because you really love horror, and it seems to be a kind of like a through line in most of your work. I actually, literally just before we started, I finished playing your 2 text games.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah. I was like, wow. Okay. And like I finished work and I'm like, okay, I had read about the games and I was like, I wonder if I have any time to play at least one before our interview today. And then I played them both because they were really compelling.
Oh, that's good. One of them I think is better than the other.
Whisperwood nearly made me shit my pants. There was just one audio cue. I was like,
the when the window smashes in Whisperwood.
Yeah, not cool.
That was very cheap of us.
Not cool, dude.
It wasn't, no.
But there was something, like, I know it's probably because it was you starting out making games, but there's something so compelling about horror and the text game genre, like, because you're just running wild with imagination. Yeah. Is there anything, like, specific that you like to do to really kind of induce horror in people, apart from break windows and
so
make you turn out the lights?
Horror really exists in one of 2 camps. I've tried to define this before. I'm like a armchair horror academic. So there's reality-based horror and there is supernatural horror. They're two very, very broad concepts. And because of this natural dichotomy is why horror as a genre is often so polarizing, because we are not all scared by the same things. I firmly believe that the deepest terror is like the fear of the unknown, and that is also a very broad thing. But for me, that just comes right back to the fear of darkness. And I grew up in a house that, for all intents and purposes, was in Blair Forest. From the Blair Witch Project. We were surrounded by natural bushland for like 3 kilometers in every direction. So I pointedly didn't watch the Blair Witch Project until I thought I was old enough. I wasn't. I was 16. And it was the same shit. And then I was like, wow, that was really amazing. And at that time, at being 16, when talking to my friends about it and people who didn't find it scary and whatnot, they said like, oh, it wasn't scary. You didn't even see the witch. And I would just like death stare them and be like, mate, I fucking wish they showed me the witch.
That's what makes it scary.
I guarantee you it's better than what's going up inside my head right now. We flash forward 10 years and in Blair Witch, like the sequel they show you the witch and it really sucks.
Yeah.
I suppose was my mindset when I go to making text-based games, because I want to play to the audience's imagination. I want to give you just enough information to make you second. And in those 2 games that you're talking about playing, like in Whisperwood, and it's been a long time since I've revisited them, but Whisperwood was very much about trying to bring about a sense of solitude, but not in a fun way. Like you're alone. There's something going on. There's repeated things like there's the mud and the earth and all that kind of stuff. And then there's obviously the fear of missing children and all that kind of thing. And then Doom, Dume, which is the other game that you're talking about. That was more. That was a very cathartic game for me. That's like I'd gone through a pretty weird breakup, but I also wanted to. That was my first time experiencing. Be like, cool. I want to write a game about romance, but can I do that through the lens of horror? And if so, what would that look like? And what it ended up looking like was a much more linear experience, but it was the same type of deal, I suppose. That I tend to come back to things that scare me. People might call me somewhat repeatist or like some sort of a hack for doing that, because you might notice trends in the horror stories that I tell, but I don't think there's any point in me trying to use horror to explain something that doesn't scare me, because then I don't understand how to do it properly.
Yeah, interesting that you said that like it's, reality versus supernatural, because like both of them were both, I felt. Whisperwood like hit something very spooky for me, because I'm always very scared of the idea of losing sense of self, which is, I guess, really cool thing about Vampire and Call of Cthulhu is that, you run out of control of your character, because it's like those are the things in life that scare me most, of like losing control of myself. And I think like the best myths and legends always kind of like tap into that as well.
Yeah, the possession, I don't want to use the word myth, but the possession concept, I suppose, is something that always really resonated with me. So across a bunch of things. So it's one thing that I generally like to highlight in my vampire games is the concept of the beast. This other thing that's inside you. And Cthulhu can do that in a whole variety of ways as well. Also when I was, I don't know, maybe 10, I think younger, maybe even 9 or 10, my parents were watching like a E-channel like top 10 countdown thing or whatever the fuck. Anyway, it was like the top 10 horror movies or some shit. Anyway, and this is like a Saturday afternoon, so I was sitting there playing with my Star Wars toys, just minding my own business, envisioning a day where I might one day own the Star Wars role-playing game. Anyway, I just idly sort of peripherally ingesting this. Here's the top 10 horror films. And I was getting to number 1, and my parents did not watch horror films growing up. They did not do it. So my attention was brought, because when we were getting close to number 1, both of my parents said, I bet it's The Exorcist. And I was kind of like, wait, since when do you two know enough about horror films to then just be like, I know what this is? And also, what is The Exorcist? And I happened to look up and see, I don't know, like a 5-second clip of Linda Blair in full demon possession mode, which was... That 5-second clip was the scariest film I've ever seen. There was only a few times in my life I can actually recall being so scared that I could not sleep, and that was one of them. And I think that sort of kickstarted an obsession with what it is about possession, which is so upsetting. And I mean, there's far greater minds than I have delved into that, because there's a whole bunch of psychological reasons why possession is so stressful. But it's definitely, for me, one of my favorite core themes in Vampire to bring up is the concept of the beast.
As part of working with Paradox, going to Vampire and to the world of darkness as a whole, you're community manager for that sort of area, well, that, I guess, department or section of the company. What does that entail? What is involved in that?
So, yeah, a community manager. So I'm part of a team. There's Alessa. She goes by Alessa Malkavian, who's our Latino America ambassador. And then I report directly to Martina Zik. She's known as Outstar.
Yes.
On YouTube. Everyone knows Outstar. So she's my direct boss. And then she's just come on recently. And then obviously there's Jason Carl, who's the brand marketing leader. So essentially, a community manager acts as sort of like a bridge between developers and the people who play the games. So if you've ever like tweeted at Bethesda or at Blizzard and had a response, like the response you get is from their community manager, or generally managers. There's usually quite a few of them. They essentially exist to help deliver information both ways. So a lot of my job entails, stimulating conversation, gauging fan sentiment, communicating that back to the devs, when things are really well received or when things are not as well received, those kind of things. Like, very rarely will I actually go through and minutely respond to everything that I see online, but I'll be reading everything that I see online and then helping pass those things on. So it's really just it's a lot of smoothing. It's like giving a lot of the consumers a presence as well in their online spaces, which a lot of people, when I'm a fan, I find that very validating to have somebody from the team like in my Discord channel or, in my Facebook group. I think that's really good. It's a sort of a position that's come up in the games industry like in the last 10 years as online players become more and more prevalent. But yeah, that's sort of my day-to-day in terms of what I can talk about right now. That's what I do. That's what I do.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of things that go on behind. And,
so you get all the weird questions from people who are just absent-mindedly on Twitter.
My Facebook message requests inbox is a minefield. That's all I'll tell you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, feel free to tell me to fuck off, but we had a question in our game which came up from a player, which was, do they brush their teeth? Do Kindred brush their teeth?
We had a scene where our characters walked into the bathroom and we found a bunch of toiletries, and then there was about a 2-minute kind of discourse between the three of us going, do vampires brush their teeth?
It really threw us through a ringer because we're like, I don't know, would they get stained from blood?
They still shower and stuff. They don't sweat or anything like that. Or if you do secrete anything, unless you're using the blush of life, you secrete blood. It takes the place of every other bodily fluid that you may have.
Yeah.
If you go gorge on somebody, you have to, in the same way you have to wash the dry blood off your face, you'd have to brush your teeth. It would be weird.
Go. Yeah.
That's just such an insane image to
me.
You
might just wash it out, but again, I don't think you can build up bacteria in the same way that, your world of darkness may vary, but...
No, we need a canon answer, sir.
Yeah. This is your job as community manager.
No, look, I will bring that up with the brand editor, Karim Wamar, and I'll ask him.
It's what everyone wants to know.
Thank you for that.
I'm so sorry. These are my players.
We're dumbasses.
How long had you been writing for? Because you mentioned earlier that you had been writing while working, that it was something that you wanted to get to eventually. Where did your love or desire to write come from, and how long have you been doing it? And what inspires you?
Well, I've always wanted to be a writer. Like I said, when I was toiling away under the Omega vinyl whips of Ralph Lauren, I still wanted to be a writer. I've always wanted to be a writer and be creative. And it's about those stepping stones. I personally, community manager for White Wolf was that's a great opportunity. I'm not going to turn that down. Just to be able to say that I was able to contribute to that body of work in whatever way was hugely important to me because of Vampire being part of my life. I've a quote from Vampire the Requiem tattooed on my back. It's very important to me.
Which quote?
In a lot of ways.
If you don't mind me asking.
It's delightfully emo, as you might think. The quote on my back is, "For now, though, would you like to dance, which is from the intro. I mean, flash forward to it's not tangential, but I also met this past Gen Con, happened to be chatting to a guy at a bar, just going on, spamming back and forth at an industry event, and it turns out that he wrote Vampire the Requiem, and and I had a laugh because I'm like, well, I've got words you've written tattooed on my back, and he's like, this is pretty weird, man. I'm like, yeah.
Weirder if you ripped off your shirt to show him, I think.
Yeah. I think I think he just believed me. Last week, I think, or the week before, I signed a book deal with Chaosium to write a supplement for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
That, but I cannot tell you. Yeah, I mean, I don't actually know if I'm allowed to tell you what it is yet, but I'm just going to err on the side of caution and just say that I can't tell you what it is. But yes, so I've got to, which is all very exciting that I brokered the deal and I pitched the book and all that, and now I have to start writing it. So that's always the downside, right?
Yeah.
But,
now I have to actually do the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And for Beyond the Veil, which is the Film Victoria co-funded video game that I'm making, that was taking up quite a lot of my time for just over a year there when it was writing that. That clocked in at about 280,000 words, I believe.
Oh,
so
wow.
that's quite a lot.
In your role as community manager and putting your ear to the ground and talking and kind of working with people that just love the game and love the world, is that kind of what inspired your foray into Book of Dreams and the Twitch stream that you do?
Oh, yeah.
Where you're actually running a game? How did that come about?
Yeah, so part of my role as community manager is to create content for people to engage with. I just went out on a limb and was like, well, let's create some really full-on content. I had a group of people that I knew who were either friends with me or were industry folks who knew Vampire and would want to play. And I just said, hey, let's do a short chronicle, maybe 5 to 6 episodes. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about how to stream and learning different programs and Zoom virtual backgrounds and stuff. And it's been real fun, especially seeing the Twitch chat and people interacting and people leaving YouTube comments and being excited. I just enjoy telling the story, and so that's good. We're actually the last episode is this coming Saturday, and I'm not sure if you all saw, but we are being joined by Shane Easton from LA by Night for the last episode.
Fantastic.
Which we're pretty excited for. Yeah.
So for those listening, that'll be last Saturday.
Yes.
Just
and it went so well.
Yeah. Oh my God. Congratulations.
Easily the best episode.
So many twists and turns.
Yeah.
I can't believe you all yelled at each other like that, though. That was just really
Shocking. And that ending, though.
You literally could be describing any of our episodes.
Yeah.
We were doing Book of Dreams. It was definitely going into it like, I want to do the bloody soap opera version of Vampire. The encouraging advice that the enigmatic Jason Carl gave to me before we started, he said, break legs and hearts. And
That's very good
very
advice.
Lovely
Yeah.
of him. Yes, exactly right.
Speaking of podcasts and of streaming, what are your thoughts? Certainly with things that are happening around us right now, the world is a little bit unpredictable. I, at least, looking at some numbers and stuff like that, seen an uptick in streamed content, in podcast content of role-playing games. Mm-hmm. How do you think that's going to impact the industry kind of once all this settles, if it does settle? Or do you think that we're seeing other storytellers modeling better behavior, or we're able to more accurately see our own strengths and weaknesses reflected back? Or what are your thoughts on it generally?
We're very fortunate that, I mean, it's even for people like me, one silver lining to everything that's going on in the world right now is that it forced me to really actually try role-playing remotely, like via Roll20 or Zoom or Fantasy Grounds or whatever you want to use. And it's something I was always very adverse to because I love having people at my table. I love, I very much love the theater of role-playing and being able to, act and engage with one another. And I found that particularly when using something like Zoom to complement whatever tool you're using to track your character sheets and roll your dice, it's actually far better than I thought. And even doing something like Book of Dreams probably wouldn't have come about necessarily had I not thought like, hey, it's apart from having to tee up time zones, this is almost in some ways more convenient with our busy lives than a regular in-person meetup would be. For instance, like as I said, because I'm running a pretty epic Call of Cthulhu campaign in my own time at the moment, and it's really nice to log off and just, oh, I'm already at home. This is great. I just have to walk over there and I'm on the couch. I don't have to worry about like getting home or anything like that, or dragging my books across town, my precious books.
Or someone bringing snacks. There's always snack person.
Exactly.
Oh,
You
love
bring your
a
own
snack break.
I imagine there's a lot of people that are trying it for the first time and discovering that it works, and I think there could be people as well that are trying role-playing as well for the first time and engaging in some of these. Like, a lot of people have a lot of time on their hands, so maybe they're checking out something like LA by Night or the Stream of Chaos for the first time to get some extra content in terms of, you know, storytelling and engaging with stuff. I know there's plenty of people that watch streaming shows and even you know, audio casts. Like, even with Book of Dreams, we've got people that watch it who do not play Vampire, who do not know anything about Vampire. All they need to know is, like, I know what a vampire is and I understand that there are dramas happening right now. That's fine.
The thing I loved about Book of Dreams is that even though it's like recording remotely and with Zoom backgrounds, everyone's still dressed up. And like, I definitely picked my clan, like Toreador, very well because I love the aesthetic. But like, there's a huge community. The community of Vampire the Masquerade is really present, and like, people love to dress up and engage. And like, I've been dabbling a bit with the 13 clan challenge, but like, it's so active and present online. And do you know why that is? Do you have any theories to why people really love to get engaged and not just play the game, but then dress up or get art commissioned of their characters? They're just
put tattoos on their back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it comes back to what, in my opinion, is the most engaging and most successful thing about Vampire is the idea of clan, is the idea of belonging. To go back to what Jason Carl has said in the past, it is you as a player, generally an outsider of some kind in your own life, getting to play the ultimate outsider. Yeah. And even within that, finding a place where you belong, the sense of tribe, the sense of kinship. And that's why people gravitate towards their clan. Like, that's one of, I believe, the core reasons there are a lot of people that don't like Vampire the Requiem, is because their favorite clan was not part of it. Like famously, Requiem whittled it down to 5 clans, where it had been 13 clans plus however many dozens of bloodlines there were. So I totally understand when someone was like, hey, this is what I identify with, these are my people, and now it's not there. Well, I don't want anything to do with that. And I think the next step for that was World of Darkness and Vampire. There's a huge impact on live action role playing in the 90s. Like, it was massive, like with the Camarilla fan club, and we still see, well, not currently, but there are huge LARP events like the Night in Question, which is run in Texas. For the last 2 years. It's probably not going to run this year, but that's a fantastic Sabbat LARP. And I do think that the LARPing, allowing you to sort of embody your character. And I think obviously there are other LARPs that are more fantasy based, like your Swordcraft and that kind of thing, but they're very much more gamified in the terms of we're going to, suit ourselves up in armor, which looks great and that's fantastic. And you're going to go, play out a battle. But not everybody is suited to wanting to do that. But I think everybody is able to dress up and essentially just enter a space where you're contributing to the game, even if you're not doing anything. If you just want to be a character, if you are a Malkavian and you are dressed up as your Malkavian and you're in your Malkavian headspace and all you do is loiter by the door and drink a glass of wine, you are contributing to the game. And I think that it's just another layer of how people want to express themselves. Like, I mean, with Book of Dreams, that was never part of our initial plan. It was literally, we did our first tech rehearsal to make sure everything would work, which was the day before the first episode. And then all the players said like, oh, hey, like, is anyone going to like dress up? I was thinking of wearing a wig. And then it became a thing. And now every week it's like, Brian, for continuity, are we continuing this? I need to know what outfit I can wear. Which put a lot of undue pressure on me. I was like, well, what am I going to wear? That's fine.
I quit a job in fashion for this.
Yeah.
Did you ever get involved with the LARP scene? I know it's something that Chris brought to us last week, just because Chris himself was used to be quite heavily involved in the LARP scene, but we never have. Is that something that you ever dabbled in or never got the chance to and wish you had, or what's your kind of connection with the LARP scene?
I've never attended a blockbuster LARP, like a full LARP. That said, a lot of my World of Darkness and Vampire games when I was starting and when I was playing and well into my 20s, a lot of those games just sort of in a lot of ways became LARPs. Like we would make our characters, and then the first few sessions would be using characters. Then we noticed we weren't even using our rolling dice anymore. Then we noticed that we'd forgotten our sheets and we didn't know. And then we're not even at a table. We're just hanging out having this conversation. We're standing up, and it's becoming more like this interactive theater experience. And that's what we were doing. Like we weren't even really dressing up, apart from we ran a chronicle where we were very inspired by Sons of Anarchy, where we were a pack of werewolves who are also bikers, and using that metaphor to talk about your birth family versus your chosen family. And because you see that in the bikie culture, but also in the idea of being a werewolf and having a pack versus having like birth parents and birth families, and what is the difference there? So like when we did that, we got to a point where we were just like, hey, yeah, we on for Let Freedom Roar on the weekend? And they're like, yeah, cool. Well, remember your sunglasses and your leather jacket, because everyone was just wearing a sunglasses and leather jacket because that's what everyone was doing. And that's like, and it makes a big difference. I would encourage everybody to check out the Kickstarter video for Mind's Eye Theatre, which was done by Night Studios. That is the video that first made me really want to LARP, but also made me terrified to LARP, because I was like, I really want to do that, but I don't want to do it if it doesn't look anywhere near as good. It needs to look exactly as good as this does.
Yeah.
And I suppose the fear of LARP is like, I don't know if you've ever been to a costume party where like a couple of people really half-assed it, and it's kind of like, you're kind of letting down the vibe, bro.
Yeah,
like,
this is my whole...
You definitely don't want... Yeah,
my nightmare.
In a LARP, everyone needs to be, in my mind at least, for it to be good, everyone needs to be on the same wavelength in terms of how serious this game is going to be taken. And whether or not, when I say seriousness, I mean just a respect for what is happening. Like I'm sure we've all played games with people that are taking the piss out of the game as you play it. And it can, with a game like Vampire, I think that is very antithesis of what we're trying to go for, I would say. At least for me when I'm running a game. Like there needs to be a level of sincerity present, even if your character is not sincere. You as a player need to be.
Yeah, there's definitely a social dynamic of cohesion around games to make them really successful. As a former LARPer, I can tell you... yeah, that's it.
Once a LARPer.
I can absolutely understand the concerns of not everyone being on the same page. It occasionally happens, but it's good when everyone is. It's one of the best things to do. I am trying to encourage these two to give it a shot as well.
I would love it, like, because I love obviously to dress up, and I take that really seriously. But like, if I was speaking with my fangs in, it would cause me to have a lisp, and I just couldn't take myself seriously after that.
I'm going to take Brian's advice and just, be near the door and just get drunk on wine.
Hey, yeah, if I've got my fangs in, then I have an excuse for not talking the whole time.
You don't always have to have your fangs out either. Like, it's my long-awaited appointment at the fangsmith is the next thing coming up. But no, you can just not have your fangs in.
I don't think I can live my life that way.
Okay.
I'm ride or die.
You've played, obviously, Werewolf, but do you have any other favourite World of Darkness games, whether it's from, what I would call the Old World of Darkness or the New World of Darkness?
Oh, yeah. I should have sent you all a photo of my bookshelf before we started this, just for context. But yes, no, I think I've got every single book that was printed for the New World of Darkness line. And I have a significant number of Old World of Darkness thing and everything for V5. It really depends on my mood and I think the type of story that I want to tell. I have some very, very good memories of Changeling. Maybe my favorite game, and I think it's my favorite game because it is the most unique and hard to do properly, was Promethean.
Ooh.
I think Promethean is a very good game, and it's almost impossible to play properly. I think for the way it's presented, it presents some very, very... all I can say is that if you are ever in a situation where there are only two people and you want to play a role-playing game once a week for the next 6 months with just one other person, then get Promethean and do it that way.
Ooh.
That's exactly what... That's all I can really... That's all I'm going to say about that.
Awfully intimate.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us. Do you have anything that you'd like to plug?
Any spruiking?
Yeah, you can wishlist Beyond the Veil on Steam. It's going to come out in September. It'll be great, and you'll have a great time. You should do that. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you are welcome to do so. I'm at BW Holland. And yes, just please play games, love games, and do what you can in life to do what you want to do with it, I think. That's some very dime store wisdom for you. So,
hey, I mean, we got it for free.
Brian, thank you so much for not just sharing your thoughts, but also sharing the story of the kid from regional Victoria who suddenly is now working with Paradox on World of Darkness games, and the fantastic steps you've made in the industry, both video games and role-playing games. Thank you for sharing that story, a storyteller as always. That about does it for us. I've been Chris. You can follow me at Twitter at BondingChris.
I am and will continue to be Ellen, and you can follow me. I'm only on Instagram at EllieBean96.
And I am Sean. I believe my Twitter handle is Slurl, which good luck spelling it, but SLIERL. And I'll also take a moment to, for those of you that are listening to Roll to Cast, if you do come back next week, we will be participating in another interview with Justin Achille.
thank you so much for having me, folks. I do really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and letting me share stories and bits and bobs with you all. Thank you so much. This is great fun.
No, thank you.
We
This has
appreciate you
been
coming on.
so cool.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening.
Adelaide by Night is a Baby Beard Media production. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And all our podcasts are available on Spreaker, YouTube, and all good podcatchers. Portions of the materials are the copyrights and trademarks of White Wolf Entertainment AB and are used with permission. All rights reserved. For more information, please visit white-wolf.com. This season of Roll to Cast is made by fans, for fans, and is not officially licensed material of White Wolf Entertainment.